The rain had already begun before the wedding guests arrived. Gray clouds rolled over the hills surrounding Ashford Manor, one of the oldest estates in the country. Luxury cars lined the curved driveway while photographers hurried beneath black umbrellas, trying to capture every perfect moment before the weather ruined their expensive equipment. Everyone had gathered for one reason: Ethan Blackwood. At only 34, Ethan had become one of the world's youngest self-made billionaires. His technology company had transformed industries, magazines called him a genius, and investors competed for 5 minutes of his attention. Yet no article ever described the loneliness behind his success. His parents had died when he was 16. The relatives who promised to care for him only fought over inheritance. He learned early that emotions were expensive, trust was dangerous, and love usually arrived carrying an invoice. By the time he became successful, he had built walls higher than any mansion he owned. No one entered. No one stayed. Not even the woman he was about to marry. Inside the bridal suite, Amelia Hart quietly looked at herself in the mirror. She wore an elegant ivory dress that had belonged to her late mother. Unlike the designer gowns displayed in magazines, this dress carried memories instead of diamonds. Her mother had sewn tiny pearls into the sleeves by hand. Each pearl represented a dream, one for courage, one for kindness, one for patience, one for hope. Amelia gently touched the fabric. "I hope you were right, Mom," she whispered. Her father had passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness. The medical bills had consumed everything: their family home, their savings, even the small bookstore her parents had owned for decades. Amelia never complained. She worked 2 jobs. She tutored children during the day. She volunteered at a community library every weekend. She believed that difficult seasons never lasted forever. That belief eventually crossed paths with Ethan Blackwood. Nearly a year earlier, Ethan had anonymously donated computers to a children's learning center. He arrived unexpectedly to inspect the installation. Everyone rushed to impress him except Amelia. She simply thanked him, not because he was wealthy. Because the children finally had something to learn with. For the first time in years, someone looked directly into Ethan's eyes instead of his bank account. Their conversation lasted only 12 minutes, but Ethan remembered it. Months later, they met again during a charity fundraiser. Then another event. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became conversations stretching late into the night. Amelia laughed easily. She asked about his childhood instead of his company. She noticed when he skipped meals. She reminded him to call his grandmother. She never requested gifts. She never mentioned his fortune. Even Ethan's assistant Victor admitted she was different. But Ethan couldn't silence the voice built by years of betrayal. Every happy moment made him wonder, what does she really want? That question quietly poisoned everything. When Ethan proposed, newspapers celebrated what they called the wedding of the decade. Amelia accepted with tears of joy. Ethan accepted with cautious hope. Neither realized they were entering marriage carrying completely different expectations. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Fresh white roses decorated every aisle. A string quartet filled the hall with gentle music. Hundreds of guests applauded as Amelia walked toward the altar. Ethan smiled politely. His expression never quite reached his eyes. The vows were simple. I promise honesty. I promise loyalty. I promise to walk beside you. When they exchanged rings, Amelia looked at Ethan with complete faith. He looked back, trying to convince himself he could believe again. Hours later, the celebration began. Business executives gathered around Ethan discussing mergers. Politicians requested meetings. Journalists chased exclusive interviews. Amelia waited patiently. Surely, once the reception settled down, they would finally celebrate together. Instead, 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Each time she approached him, someone interrupted. Eventually, Ethan glanced toward her. I'll be there in a minute. Another meeting followed, then another. Near midnight, Amelia stood alone on the balcony overlooking the gardens. Her wedding bouquet rested beside her untouched. An elderly woman slowly approached. It was Ethan's grandmother, Margaret Blackwood. Unlike the rest of the family, Margaret noticed everything. She quietly placed a warm shawl around Amelia's shoulders. "Cold?" "A little." Margaret smiled gently. "No, you aren't cold. You're lonely." Amelia forced a smile. "It's only one busy evening." Margaret looked toward the ballroom where Ethan remained surrounded by powerful people. Sometimes successful men mistake attention for importance. They learn too late which one truly matters. Amelia remained silent. Margaret squeezed her hand. "Don't stop believing in the man you married, but don't disappear while waiting for him to notice you." Those words stayed with Amelia long after the reception ended. The honeymoon never happened. A major business acquisition required Ethan's immediate attention. Meetings replaced vacations. Conference calls replaced conversations. Luxury hotels became boardrooms. Private jets became moving offices. Amelia told herself it was temporary. She unpacked alone, decorated their enormous home, prepared meals that often became cold before Ethan returned. Sometimes he didn't return until sunrise. When he finally arrived, exhaustion covered his face. "I'm sorry. It's been a difficult week." She smiled. "I understand." The difficult week became a difficult month. Then another. One evening, Amelia surprised him with dinner. She had recreated recipes from his childhood after secretly asking Margaret for help. Candles glowed softly. Fresh bread filled the dining room with warmth. Everything was perfect, except Ethan never arrived. At midnight, his assistant called. Mr. Blackwood had to fly to Singapore. He asked me to apologize. Amelia quietly placed every untouched plate into the refrigerator. She didn't cry. Not yet. Months passed. The mansion felt larger every day. Servants maintained every room. Gardeners cared for every flower. Security guards protected every entrance. Yet no one noticed how empty the house had become. One afternoon, Amelia visited the Children's Learning Center where she first met Ethan. The director welcomed her warmly. The children ran toward her laughing. For several hours, she forgot she lived inside a silent mansion. One little girl handed Amelia a drawing. It showed a family holding hands. "That's you," the child said. "And your husband." Amelia smiled. "Where am I?" The little girl pointed toward the tiny figure standing beneath a large tree. "Waiting." Amelia stared at the drawing. Waiting. The child had unknowingly described her entire marriage. Late that evening, Ethan returned unexpectedly. He found Amelia reading beside the fireplace. "I'm home," she smiled. "I made tea." He nodded while checking emails. She watched him carefully. "When was the last time you took one day off?" "I don't remember." "When was the last time we had dinner together?" He sighed. "Amelia, please. I'm exhausted. So am I." That answer surprised him. "You don't work 18-hour days." "No. I work every day trying not to lose my husband." Silence filled the room. Instead of answering, Ethan walked upstairs. The conversation ended before it truly began. The following week, headlines announced another billion-dollar achievement. Television praised Ethan as the nation's most dedicated entrepreneur. Business magazines called him unstoppable. At home, he barely noticed his wife had stopped smiling. Margaret visited one afternoon carrying homemade cookies. She immediately sensed the change. "You've become quieter." Amelia poured tea. "I'm learning." "What are you learning?" That loneliness can exist inside the happiest-looking houses. Margaret's eyes filled with sadness. "My grandson inherited his grandfather's intelligence. I prayed he wouldn't inherit his blindness." A month later, Ethan organized an extravagant charity gala. Thousands attended. Celebrities praised his generosity. Millions were donated. Reporters photographed every smile. Amelia stood beside him throughout the evening, invisible. Several guests assumed she worked for the event. Others introduced themselves without realizing she was Ethan's wife. Ethan never corrected them, not intentionally, he simply never noticed. While leaving the ballroom, Amelia overheard two executives speaking. Blackwood's marriage won't last. He married for publicity. He barely acknowledges her. The words pierced deeper because they sounded true. Winter arrived. Snow covered the gardens. The mansion became breathtaking. Inside, warmth continued disappearing. Amelia began writing in a journal every evening. Not complaints, not accusations, simply thoughts she couldn't say aloud. She wrote about hope, about patience, about remembering the man she once believed she knew. She also wrote about fear that one day she would stop waiting. On Christmas morning, she woke early. She wrapped a simple gift. Inside was a leather notebook. The first page contained only one sentence. "May this year give us more conversations than meetings." Ethan smiled politely. "Thank you." His phone rang. Within seconds, another emergency demanded attention. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly. "I'll be back tonight." He wasn't. January brought another surprise. Amelia discovered she had been selected to lead a nationwide literacy foundation. The position required relocating temporarily to another city. She hesitated. She wanted Ethan's opinion. 3 different attempts to discuss it ended with interrupted phone calls. Finally, she accepted. Not because she wanted to leave, because waiting had become her full-time occupation. Before departing, she packed only one suitcase. She left the rest untouched. Surely she would return. Surely things would improve. Margaret hugged her tightly. "Promise me something." "What?" "If your heart begins breaking." "Don't hide the pieces," Amelia nodded. "I promise." As the car disappeared beyond the mansion gates, Ethan remained inside another meeting, unaware that his wife had quietly driven away to begin the first chapter of a life without him. He believed she was simply traveling for work. He never noticed that she hadn't said goodbye in person. He never noticed the silence left behind. And he certainly never imagined that months later, one small velvet box, containing a wedding ring, beside a handwritten goodbye letter, would force him to confront everything he had ignored. He had spent years building the world's most successful company. Soon he would discover that rebuilding one broken heart would be far more difficult. 3 months passed. For Ethan Blackwood, time disappeared inside boardrooms, private jets, and endless negotiations. Every newspaper celebrated another business victory. His company expanded into 3 new countries. Investors praised his leadership. Financial magazines called it the greatest year of his career. Yet every evening, when he returned to Blackwood Manor, something felt strangely different. The mansion was spotless. Every light worked. Fresh flowers appeared in crystal vases every morning. Dinner was always prepared, but the warmth that had once quietly filled every room had vanished. At first, Ethan convinced himself Amelia was simply busy with the Literacy Foundation in another city. They exchanged short messages. "Hope your meeting goes well. Take care. Sleep early." None of them sounded like the conversations they once shared. One evening he called her. The phone rang. Then voicemail. He tried again the next day. Another voicemail. Victor noticed the change. "Would you like me to arrange a flight so you can visit Mrs. Blackwood?" Ethan closed his laptop. "She probably needs space." Victor hesitated. "Sometimes people don't need space, sir. They need to know they're important." Ethan gave no answer. Across the country, Amelia poured her heart into rebuilding abandoned libraries in small towns. She read stories to children every afternoon. She trained volunteers. She organized book drives, unlike the glamorous charity galas. She had attended with Ethan. These places had peeling paint, broken shelves, and old wooden chairs. Yet every smile felt genuine. One little boy hugged her after receiving his very first storybook. "I'll read this to my little sister." Amelia smiled. Promise? I promise. Watching him run away reminded her why kindness always mattered. Not because it changed the world overnight. Because it changed one person's tomorrow. Still. Every night, loneliness returned. She kept wearing her wedding ring. Not because she believed everything was perfect, because she still believed people could change. Back at Blackwood Manor, Margaret arrived unexpectedly. She found Ethan eating breakfast alone while answering emails. Your coffee is cold. I know. So is your marriage. Ethan looked up. Grandmother. You haven't visited your wife once. I've been busy. Margaret slowly sat across from him. When your grandfather was building our family business, he once missed my birthday. I forgave him. The following year, he missed our anniversary. I forgave him. The third year, he forgot our son's school performance. I stopped waiting. Ethan listened silently. You know what your grandfather told me before he died? What? He said losing money hurt. Losing respect hurt more. But losing the woman who believed in him was the only pain he never escaped. Margaret stood. You still have time. She left before Ethan could answer. That evening, Ethan canceled 2 meetings. For the first time in months. He walked through the mansion instead of rushing upstairs. Every room reminded him of Amelia, the piano she rarely played, the half-finished puzzle near the fireplace, a basket filled with children's books she had planned to donate. He smiled faintly. She always left little notes inside each donated book. May this story help you believe in yourself. Simple words. Powerful words. Then he noticed something strange. The art room door was slightly open. Amelia loved painting during quiet evenings. He hadn't entered that room since the wedding. Dust covered the easels. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Several unfinished canvases stood against the wall. One painting caught his attention. It showed 2 people standing on opposite sides of a bridge. The bridge was complete, yet neither person crossed. On the back, she had written one sentence. Distance is rarely measured in miles. Ethan stared for several moments. He suddenly realized she had been telling him how she felt long before she ever said the words aloud. He simply hadn't been listening. The next morning, he boarded his private jet. Destination: the city where Amelia was working. For the first time in years, business could wait. His assistant looked relieved. I'll reschedule everything. No. Ethan shook his head. Cancel everything. Victor smiled. Yes, sir. When Ethan arrived, volunteers recognized him immediately. Whispers spread through the old library. The billionaire. That's Amelia's husband. He expected Amelia to run toward him. Instead, she stood across the room, calmly placing books onto a shelf. She looked surprised, but not excited, not angry. Just tired. You came. I wanted to see you. She nodded politely. The children are reading now. Can we talk later? There was no warmth in her voice, only kindness. Kindness without closeness, for reasons he couldn't explain. That frightened Ethan more than anger ever could. He spent the afternoon watching her work. She remembered every child's name. She repaired torn books with clear tape. She laughed with volunteers. She comforted a little girl who cried because she couldn't read as quickly as the others. Amelia knelt beside her. Everyone learns at their own pace. When I was little, my father told me flowers don't bloom on the same day. That doesn't make one flower better than another. The little girl smiled. Ethan quietly watched. This was the woman he had married. Not because she was beautiful, but because she carried hope wherever she went. How had he forgotten that? That evening, they walked through a quiet park. Snow covered the benches. Streetlights reflected across the frozen lake. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I've missed you. Amelia looked ahead. I believe you. But missing someone and making room for them are different things. He lowered his eyes. I know. No. She gently shook her head. I don't think you do. She stopped walking. Ethan, do you remember the last promise you made me? He searched his memory. You promised we'd build a life together. She smiled sadly. Instead, you built an empire. I was simply expected to live inside it. Her words weren't spoken with anger. That made them hurt even more. I thought I was providing everything. You were. She nodded. Everything except yourself. Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang. The company board, an emergency acquisition. Billions of dollars depended on his decision. He stared at the screen. For the first time. He pressed decline. Amelia noticed. A tiny spark of hope appeared in her eyes. You ignored it. I chose you. She smiled faintly. I wish you had chosen us before we became strangers. Those words stayed with Ethan long after they returned to separate hotel rooms. For the first time since becoming a billionaire, he couldn't sleep. Not because of business, because he finally understood the cost of success. And deep inside, he feared that understanding had come far too late. The flight back to Blackwood Manor was the quietest Ethan Blackwood had ever taken. Normally, he spent every journey reviewing contracts, studying financial reports, or preparing for meetings. This time, his laptop remained closed on the table beside him. His mind replayed every word Amelia had spoken. You gave me everything, except yourself. For years, he had measured success in numbers, profits, acquisitions, skyscrapers, headlines, awards, never in moments, never in conversations, never in memories. When the private jet landed just before sunset, Victor met him at the estate. There is something you should see, sir. Ethan frowned. What happened? The housekeeping staff was preparing the West Wing for renovations. Mrs. Blackwood asked that no one enter her private sitting room after she left. Victor hesitated. But a package was found inside a locked drawer. It has your name on it. A strange feeling settled over Ethan's chest. He hurried through the mansion, climbing the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. The room looked exactly as Amelia had left it. A small reading chair stood beside the window. Fresh lavender, now dried, remained in a crystal vase. An unfinished scarf lay neatly folded in a basket. It felt as if time had stopped the day she walked away. On the writing desk rested a small velvet box and a cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Amelia's graceful handwriting, were 4 simple words. For Ethan, when you're ready. His hands trembled. He slowly opened the envelope first. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've finally stopped long enough to notice something was missing. I hope it isn't too late. When we stood before our families on our wedding day, I believed we were beginning a journey together. Instead, I slowly realized I was walking beside someone who was always looking ahead, but never looking beside him. Please understand something. I never wanted your fortune. I never wanted your fame. I never wanted your company. I only wanted my husband. Every evening I waited for one conversation. Every birthday I wished for one quiet dinner. Every holiday I hoped you would choose home before another meeting. Sometimes you almost did, but almost became our marriage. I blamed myself at first. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I wasn't patient enough. Maybe I expected too much. Then I realized love shouldn't feel like competing with a calendar. You never shouted at me. You never insulted me. You simply forgot to be present. That hurt more than anger ever could. I still believe you are a good man. The world sees your generosity. I have seen your kindness. I know your heart is capable of extraordinary things. But kindness given to strangers means very little if the people waiting at home receive only your absence. So today, I am choosing something I should have chosen sooner. Peace. I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. I am leaving because I started loving myself enough to stop waiting. Inside this box is the wedding ring you placed on my finger. It never represented failure. It represented hope. I pray one day it represents healing too. If our paths ever cross again, I hope you have become the man you were always capable of being. No matter what happens, thank you for teaching me that love should never require someone to disappear. Goodbye. Amelia. By the time Ethan reached the final sentence, tears blurred the ink. He carefully opened the velvet box. Inside lay Amelia's wedding ring. Beneath it was another folded piece of paper. This one contained only a single sentence. Money built this house, but love was supposed to make it a home. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, he cried. Not the quiet tears of frustration after losing a business deal. Not the controlled emotion shown at his parents' funeral. These were tears of regret, raw, unstoppable. Every ignored dinner, every canceled vacation, every broken promise, every lonely evening Amelia had endured came rushing back. He whispered into the empty room, "I'm sorry." But only silence answered. The next morning, Margaret found him sitting in Amelia's reading chair. He had not slept. The letter remained in his hands. She quietly sat beside him. "You found it?" He nodded. "I destroyed my own marriage." Margaret gently took the letter. "No, you neglected it. Those are different things. I don't deserve another chance." "Perhaps not." She looked toward the window. But redemption isn't something people deserve. It's something they choose. That afternoon, Ethan made a decision that shocked the entire business world. He called an emergency board meeting. Every executive expected another major acquisition. Instead, Ethan stood before them with no presentation. No company can survive without leadership. The directors nodded. He continued, "And no life can survive without balance." The room grew silent. "I have spent years asking all of you to sacrifice your families for this company. That ends today." Several executives exchanged confused glances. "We are introducing mandatory family leave. No employee will be rewarded for missing birthdays, anniversaries, or their children's important moments. Success that destroys a family is not success." One director objected. "Our profits," Ethan interrupted gently. "Our profits have never been the problem. Our priorities have." News of the announcement spread across the country within hours. Employees couldn't believe it. Business analysts called it revolutionary. For Ethan, however, it wasn't about public image. It was about finally understanding what truly mattered. Days later, he visited the Literacy Foundation without cameras or security. He didn't go to persuade Amelia to return. He went simply to help. He unpacked donated books, painted old shelves, read stories to children. At first, the volunteers were surprised to see one of the world's richest men carrying dusty boxes. But Ethan never mentioned his name. One afternoon, Amelia quietly entered the library. She stopped in the doorway. Across the room, Ethan was helping a little boy sound out difficult words. Patiently, without looking at his phone once. The little boy finished the page. "I did it." Ethan smiled. "You certainly did." When he looked up, he saw Amelia. Neither moved, neither spoke. She had expected apologies, excuses, promises. Instead, she saw change. Real change, the kind that happens when no one is watching. She slowly walked toward him. "You came back." He nodded. "I found your letter." "I know. I deserved every word." Amelia remained silent. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I only wanted you to know." He looked around the library. "That you were right. I spent years building a business. I forgot to build a life. A small smile appeared on Amelia's face. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because for the first time since their wedding, he was truly listening. Outside, soft snow began falling again. Months earlier, snow had symbolized loneliness. Now, it felt like a quiet beginning. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. Healing would take time. Trust would have to be rebuilt. Love would need patience. But for the first time in a very long while, they were walking in the same direction. Spring arrived quietly. The snow that had once covered the streets melted into flowing streams, and the trees surrounding the literacy foundation slowly came back to life. Children once again filled the old library with laughter, turning silent rooms into places of hope. For Ethan Blackwood, every sunrise now meant something entirely different. Instead of beginning his day with financial reports, he started each morning at the foundation. Sometimes he repaired broken shelves. Sometimes he sorted donated books. Sometimes he simply sat on the floor, reading fairy tales to children who had never owned a book of their own. The volunteers still found it difficult to believe. The same billionaire who once measured every hour in dollars now happily spent an afternoon helping a 6-year-old learn the alphabet. Amelia noticed everything. She noticed he no longer checked his phone every few minutes. She noticed he remembered every volunteer's name. She noticed he stayed long after everyone else had gone home, quietly sweeping the floor without being asked. Yet despite all the changes, she kept a careful distance. Trust, she had learned, was rebuilt one honest day at a time. One afternoon, as they stacked donated books together, Ethan finally spoke. "I know you're still afraid." Amelia smiled gently. "I'm not afraid of loving you." She placed another book on the shelf. "I'm afraid of losing myself again." Those words stayed with Ethan. He realized forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and he would have to walk every step without expecting shortcuts. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, inside the headquarters of Blackwood Technologies, another story was unfolding. For years, Ethan's company had been managed by executives who believed endless growth mattered more than people. Now, their Billionaire CEO was spending more time inside a community library than inside the boardroom. Not everyone approved. At the center of the growing dissatisfaction stood Adrian Cole, the company's chief financial officer. Adrian had worked beside Ethan for nearly 12 years. Brilliant, ambitious, cold. He quietly gathered support from several investors who feared Ethan had become soft. One evening, Adrian addressed a private meeting. "Our company is losing focus. Mr. Blackwood is distracted. If this continues, we all lose." Several directors nodded. Adrian smiled. "If Ethan won't protect the empire, someone else will." No one realized those words were the beginning of a betrayal. A week later, Amelia received unexpected news. The government announced that funding for dozens of community literacy programs would end within 60 days. Their foundation was among those affected. Without funding, nearly 30 libraries would close. Thousands of children would lose access to books. Volunteers gathered inside the meeting hall. Silence filled the room. Some quietly cried. Others stared at the financial reports. "We only have enough money for 6 more weeks," the director whispered. Amelia remained calm. "We'll find another way." No one knew how. That evening, Ethan found Amelia sitting alone beneath an old oak tree outside the library. She handed him the report. He read every page, then looked at her. "How much?" She answered softly. "Enough that most people would walk away." Ethan folded the papers. "Then we'll stay." She looked at him. "You don't even know the amount." "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He smiled. "Not anymore." The following morning, Ethan flew to Blackwood headquarters. It was his first appearance in weeks. Executives applauded politely as he entered the boardroom. Adrian began presenting quarterly profits. Halfway through the meeting, Ethan interrupted. "I have another announcement." Everyone looked up. I'm creating the Blackwood Foundation for Education. The room fell silent. It will permanently fund every literacy center we currently support. One director quickly calculated the cost. That would require billions over the next decade. Ethan nodded. Yes. Adrian leaned forward. Our shareholders won't approve. They don't have to, Ethan calmly replied. I'll fund it personally. The room exploded with whispers. Adrian could barely hide his frustration. You're risking your fortune, Ethan smiled. I've risked something far more valuable before. My family. I won't make that mistake again. News of Ethan's announcement spread across television and social media within hours. Parents celebrated. Teachers cried. Thousands of volunteers thanked him. But behind the scenes, Adrian made his move. Late that night, he secretly transferred confidential company files to an outside competitor. His plan was simple. If the company collapsed under Ethan's leadership, investors would force Ethan to resign. Then Adrian would take control. He believed no one would ever discover the truth. He was wrong. Victor, Ethan's loyal assistant, noticed unusual activity inside the company's secure servers. He quietly began investigating. What he uncovered shocked him. Millions of confidential documents had been copied. Internal contracts had disappeared. Evidence pointed toward someone with executive-level access. Victor immediately called Ethan. I think someone inside the company is trying to destroy everything you've built. Ethan looked toward the children reading inside the library. Months earlier, he would have rushed back in panic. This time he simply asked, Can it wait until morning? Victor hesitated. It can. Good. Ethan smiled. I'm reading to the children tonight. Victor hung up and smiled to himself. His boss had changed more than anyone realized. The next morning, Ethan returned to headquarters. Within hours, the internal investigation identified Adrian as the source of the security breach. When confronted, Adrian didn't deny it. You abandoned this company. You chose strangers over business. Ethan calmly answered, No. I finally realized the people inside this company are not machines. They're fathers, mothers, sons, daughters. If success requires them to sacrifice every relationship they love, then we've already failed. Security escorted Adrian from the building. Several employees quietly applauded. Not because Adrian had been fired, because for the first time in years, someone had reminded them that humanity mattered more than profit. That evening, Ethan returned to the Literacy Foundation. He expected to find Amelia organizing books. Instead, he found dozens of children waiting outside with handmade cards. One little girl stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood. He knelt. Yes? She handed him a folded drawing. It showed a family standing inside a library. Above them were the words, Thank you for helping stories stay alive. Ethan felt tears gathering again. Months ago, he had measured success by headlines. Now, one crayon drawing meant more than every business award hanging inside his office. He looked across the room. Amelia was watching quietly. For the first time since their wedding, she didn't see the billionaire. She saw the man she had always believed he could become. The little girl's drawing remained in Ethan's hands long after the children had gone home. He carefully folded it and placed it inside the inside pocket of his jacket. Months ago, that pocket had always carried business contracts. Now it carried a child's drawing. As Amelia locked the library doors, she noticed him looking toward the empty reading room. What are you thinking? She asked. Ethan smiled softly. I spent years believing success meant people would remember my name. He looked around the quiet library. Now I hope they remember how they felt when I was around. Amelia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she unlocked the door again. Come inside. He looked confused. The children are gone. I know, she said with a smile. This isn't for them. Inside the library, the volunteers had secretly decorated the room with warm lights, fresh flowers. and hundreds of handwritten notes from children and families whose lives had been changed by the literacy program. One note read, "Because of this library, my daughter reads bedtime stories to her little brother every night." Another said, "I never believed I could finish school. Now I'm the first person in my family going to university." An elderly man had written, "At 71, I learned to read my late wife's letters for the first time." Ethan quietly read every message. By the time he reached the last one, tears filled his eyes again. Amelia walked beside him. "These people don't know how much money you have. They only know you showed up." A few weeks later, the Blackwood Foundation for Education officially opened. Instead of hosting the event in a luxury hotel, Ethan insisted it be held in the courtyard of the first little library where he and Amelia had met. Children planted young oak trees around the building. Teachers, volunteers, parents, and local families attended. There were no celebrity performances, no extravagant decorations, no expensive fireworks. Just ordinary people celebrating an extraordinary beginning. When reporters asked Ethan why he had invested so much of his personal fortune into education, he answered with quiet honesty. "Years ago, I believed wealth was measured by what I owned. I was wrong. Real wealth is measured by the number of lives that become brighter because you were willing to care." The quote spread across newspapers, television, and social media around the world. But Ethan barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the children laughing nearby. That evening, after the celebration ended, Margaret invited Ethan and Amelia back to Blackwood. The mansion looked different. Gone were the cold marble decorations and oversized, formal furniture that made it feel more like a museum than a home. Bookshelves filled the living room. Family photographs lined the hallway. The enormous dining table had been replaced by a smaller, wooden one where conversations felt natural. Fresh flowers stood beside the windows. Warm light filled every room. Amelia looked around in surprise. "You changed everything." Ethan nodded. "No," he smiled. "I finally finished what you started." Margaret quietly wiped away a tear. "This house finally sounds alive again." For the first time since their wedding, laughter echoed through Blackwood. Months passed. The Literacy Foundation expanded into towns that had never had a public library. Mobile reading buses traveled into remote villages. Scholarships helped hundreds of children remain in school. Employees at Blackwood Technologies discovered something unexpected as well. Productivity increased. Families grew stronger. Parents attended school plays. Workers took vacations without fear. Birthdays, anniversaries, and family dinners were no longer considered obstacles to success. Other companies soon adopted similar policies. Business magazines called it the Blackwood Balance. Ethan always corrected them. "It isn't my idea. It's my wife's lesson." One autumn afternoon, Ethan and Amelia returned to the old bridge from Amelia's unfinished painting, the same bridge where two people had once stood on opposite sides. This time they crossed it together. Halfway across, Ethan stopped. "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and removed the same velvet box that had once broken his heart. Amelia looked at it quietly. "I've kept it with me every day." He opened the box. Inside was her wedding ring, exactly as she had left it. "I never wanted to replace this ring," he said. "Wanted to become worthy of it." He didn't kneel. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply held out his hand. "This time, I can't promise perfection. I can't promise life will always be easy. But I promise you'll never again have to compete with my work for my attention. I promise that when you speak, I'll listen. When you hurt, I'll stay. And when life becomes difficult, we'll carry it together." Amelia looked into his eyes. Months earlier, she would have searched for certainty. Now she searched for sincerity. She found it. With tears quietly running down her cheeks, She placed the ring back onto her finger. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the future no longer looked like the past. She slipped her hand into his. Let's go home. 5 years later, Blackwood Manor no longer appeared in magazines because of its luxury. It became famous for something far more meaningful. Every Saturday morning, its gates opened to children from local schools. The grand ballroom had become a public reading hall. The gardens hosted storytelling festivals. The guest house welcomed teachers attending educational workshops. The mansion that had once symbolized loneliness had become a place filled with learning, kindness, and laughter. One rainy afternoon, a young journalist asked Ethan the question people had wondered for years. "Mr. Blackwood, what was the most expensive mistake you ever made?" The room became quiet. Everyone expected him to mention a failed investment or a business decision. Instead, he smiled at Amelia, who was reading to a group of children across the room. "My most expensive mistake wasn't measured in money. It was measured in moments. I almost lost the woman who loved me because I believed I had more time." He paused before adding, "Never assume the people waiting for you will always keep waiting. The farm. Greatest investment you'll ever make isn't in a company. It's in the people who choose to walk through life beside you." The journalist lowered his notebook. There was nothing left to ask. That evening, after the children had gone home, Ethan and Amelia sat together on the front porch as gentle rain fell across the gardens. Years earlier, Rain had witnessed the beginning of a lonely marriage. Now it witnessed something entirely different. Peace neither spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. Some conversations are held in silence. Some promises are kept through daily actions. And some love stories are not remembered because they were perfect. They are remembered because two imperfect people found the courage to change before it was truly too late.